Recorded a video in a while for the cheese remote, so decided to do a new one. I recently purchased and watched Cannonball Run 2. Now, I've seen Cannonball Run 2 before. It many years ago. It really isn't on often. It wasn't a DVD I had to have, one of those situations. Until recently, I've gone back and I've watched the original Cannonball Run. I don't even know how many times, more times than I can count. And I love the film. It's absolutely fucking funny. It's perfect in every way. Whatever mistakes it makes, continuing errors, I don't care. It's fucking funny as hell. It's still fucking funny as hell. So I remember the basics about Cannonball Run 2. I remember Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise in a limousine. I remember them dressed as military guys. I remember they had two nuns on board. I remembered Sammy and Dean were cops. I remember the Sheik purchases the cannonball and wants them to race back for $1 million, which seems really ridiculous. I mean, I guess it's more about, for him, more about the honor of being the fastest racer than actually winning it, because he throws around money like crazy in the second movie. Buying a aircraft carrier and franchise is ridiculousness. It's completely over the top. But I had wanted to sit back recently after having seen Cannonball Run a number of times. And I've often said to myself, man, if I ever see Cannonball Run on 2, I'm just going to grab it. Because I remember the basics of the movie. I remember it not being as good as the first movie, but I really didn't remember why. Or maybe I blocked that out. Probably both. At any rate, I haven't seen it in a long time. So I did get it finally on DVD off of eBay. Which, ironically enough, I'm going to point it out to you right now, fairly cheap. So was the original Cannonball Run on DVD. It's still fair. Both are fairly cheap on eBay. I think you can get Cannonball Run on Blu-ray. But at any rate, they're still fairly cheap. The weird thing about it is, and I don't think a lot of people know, maybe some do, maybe some don't, is there's actually a third Cannonball Run movie. But it was entitled Speed Zone. And I'm going to be honest with you, I've never seen it, but I know Cannonball Speed Zone is so shitty, it makes Cannonball Run 2 look like Cannonball Run 1. The only character that carries over into the third movie is Jamie Farr, and it's a very brief cameo where he announces his character is retiring from racing in the Cannonball. Just to give you an idea. But I hadn't seen Cannonball Run 2 in a long time. And man, you forget how shitty the movie is. It shouldn't be that shitty, to be honest with you. A bunch of stars, friends, most of them I'm sure were friends because they, did these movies and were willing to do these movies and wanted to do them. And you could clearly see in things like the post-credits bits that they had a fun time making the film. Now, the first Cannonball Run just comes off as classic, and the second one comes off as, the only way to put it is, I'm sure in the writer's room, when they were coming up with ideas for the first Cannonball Run, which is sort of based on a true story. There was a race called the Cannonball Run, and the director and the producer of the movie did actually, I believe it was the producer, I know the director, raced in the original Cannonball Run in an ambulance. So it's kind of based on a true story. So I'm sure they embellished the story, I'm sure they embellished characters, and maybe they took from real life characters and people who did this as well. But I have a feeling it was a mixture of whatever over-the-topness you might have had in the movie was at least grounded in the reality that some of this had actually happened and had actually been done. Now, that being said, when they were writing the first Cannonball Run, I kind of picture Cannonball Run 2 was birthed when they were making the first Cannonball Run. Inadvertently. I feel that they were probably putting together a bunch of ideas, and eventually, as the process goes, they probably take some ideas and remove them and throw them out, put them in a bucket and say, you know what, this was shit, this sucked, let's throw that away, we don't need this part, this is kind of stupid, this is a little over the top, this is more ridiculous than we need it to be. Just throw everything that fucking sucks in a bucket, and we're done. Then whatever's left, whatever we have left, the good stuff will just be in the movie. Now, I'm sure, like I said, they probably threw out a bunch of ideas, and the ones that were good stuff stayed, and we got Cannonball Run. The ones that were shit stuff was thrown away. Or was it? Because, honestly, Cannonball Run 2 feels like all that garbage stuff, like if they throw out 100 ideas for what should be in the script of the original Cannonball Run, if 50 of those ideas were thrown in the garbage because they were so fucking terrible and so boring or so bad or so hacky and just not unfunny and ridiculous or over the top ridiculous or way too far ridiculous, those 50 ideas, I think somebody grabbed that bucket and stitched all those things together and said, here's Cannonball Run 2. Now, as a good example, they went too far on a lot of bits. It's a very convoluted plot about Fender Bomb Sammy Davis Jr.'s character owing some money to a guy who owes money to the mob. I mean, there's like a double owing. It's like Sammy owes money to him. Sammy owes money to the guy that owns the Pinto Ranch. The guy that owns the Pinto Ranch owes money to the mob. So the mob gets the idea to kidnap the Sheik in the middle of the race and steal his $1 million that he's carrying with him for the prize money. And it's just so convoluted and ridiculous. There's bits where the mobsters have a magnet on a helicopter and they come down on the car and try to lift it up off the ground and they can't get the lift. There's another bit where there's a road sign and they put like a rope across the thing, a steel cable across it, and it rips through a road sign. There's another bit where the car actually has like fucking like tooth clamps so that when they come up to the back of the car, the Sheik's car, it can clamp onto his bumper, which, by the way, It basically just grabs the bumper. It doesn't even hold it. There's no way it would. And of course, when they hit the brakes, like the front end of their car comes off, it almost comes off as like a Looney Tune cartoon almost. I expected the Coyote and the friggin' Roadrunner Meep to run by. It was very, very silly and ridiculous and over the top. I mean, even Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise's characters going across the country as a general and a private, and having two nuns on board transporting nuclear waste, and enlisting Jim Neighbors as their driver. Everything just falls so fucking flat. I mean, it has some good moments in it that are genuinely pretty funny, but the genuinely pretty funny moments are so outweighed by stuff like Doug McClure as wearing like a genie's outfit practically as Jamie Farr's like subservient slave, bare-chested Doug McClure. It was ridiculous. Like even the plot. Like here's a good example: the two hot chicks in the hot car. From the first movie, it's two different girls. They have a car, and they keep downgrading their car each time because their car breaks down. But at the end of the film, they're driving a fucking tow truck. You kind of missed the point there. The point was hot girls in a hot car, and now they're driving a fucking tow truck. How do you fuck that up? But they managed to fuck that up. We have a point in time where they got to go rescue the Sheik, and, we've got Burt Reynolds, Dom DeLuise, and Sammy Davis Jr. dressed in drag. And not even good drag. I mean, it wasn't some point where you'd be like, okay, like Gene Hackman in The Birdcage is bad drag, but it's funny. This was them dressed in like genie outfits with the veils across their face. It was hard. It was a horrible drag. It was one of those moments where you're just like, who fucking sold you on that idea? I mean, that should have been something you threw right out immediately and said, that's fucking stupid as shit. Why would that even be in this movie? So Cannonball Run 2 is just, we've got a monkey driving, and it's just so far over the fucking top. Like I said, it feels like every bad idea that might have been tossed out to be used in Cannonball Run, but was thrown away and said, we're not going to use it, ended up in this fucking film. We've got a car that turns into a submarine, and I'm not going to shit on the actors on some of this. Richard Kiel, paired with Jackie Chan, was pretty fucking funny, to be honest. But the fact that the car can fly, the car had an afterburner, they're doing ridiculous, ludicrous speeds on the road, and it turns into a submarine, and there was just so much of it that was fucking ridiculously over the top. I mean, you watch it and you just think to yourself, first of all, it's way more boring than the first movie. You would think to yourself a movie about a car race would be exciting, but it really wasn't that exciting. It was pretty fucking boring in most parts. But there are parts that are funny. I mean, Sinatra being in the film was kind of funny. It was kind of fun. I enjoyed seeing Frank in this movie. I enjoyed having him in this movie, and there were things like that. Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin's interaction is just so well timed, so perfect, so down pat that again they're fun. Even though Dom DeLuise and Burt Reynolds had shitty gimmicks for their driving in this one, they're still very funny together. They got along well, and you could see that there's like a core friendship between the two of them and Sammy and Dean, and they had a lot of fun doing this movie. Regardless of how bad it turned out, they had a lot of fun doing it, and that comes across really nicely and works out very well. But overall, the movie just falls so flat for being over the top in jokes that are ridiculously unneeded, unnecessary, and childish, and it was like writers sat down and just were stretching shit as thin as they could possibly stretch it. If Captain Chaos was funny in the last movie, he's just there for this movie. There's no real reason for him to be in it. There wasn't any moment where it was tender, or he's a good example too. There was no moment in this movie, like there's a little bit of a tender subplot between Farrah Fawcett and Burt Reynolds in the first movie. And even a tender moment or two between Farrah and Dom, and a tender moment at the end between Burt and Dom as well, with the whole thing where he takes the mask off of him and tells him we've had enough of Captain Cat. There's no tender moment in this movie. Not at all. There's no fucking... It was like... as a good example, if you've seen the Police Academy movies, the first Police Academy movie was really funny. And the second one wasn't bad. You know how bad it was by the sixth movie or seventh movie? And it was just so watered down and so terrible. That's what happened between two movies for the Cannonball Run. I mean, you get it with the Police Academy. It was 7 movies. You're beating the same jokes into the fucking ground over and over again. But the goddamn Cannonball Run movies, you would imagine, would have had more than one movie in it that was decent. I mean, it's a simple fucking premise. You put a bunch of celebrities who are either having a lot of fun or making fun of each other or friends or whatever the deal is, and making fun of the characters they've been part of. Put them in cars, race them across the fucking country, and hilarity ensues. But Cannonball Run, that's what happened. Cannonball Run 2, it was just so hacky and so ridiculous and so bad in so many areas that whatever you can find in Cannonball Run 2 that is decent and is fun and is funny, it's like an 8-to-1 ratio. 8 bad jokes for 1 good one. That's how it's so bad. Am I disappointed that I bought it? No, not really. I'm kind of a glutton for shitty movies. So to have it and be able to watch it every once in a while and remind myself that it's such a bad film. As a good example, Caddyshack 2. I'll watch both of those back to back because I'm that completist asshole who has to watch those movies. And this is the same situation, Cannonball. At some point in time, I will probably track down Speed Zone, which is the third Cannonball Run movie. But here's the thing that's funny about it. Cannonball Run and Cannonball 2, you might pay $10 for each on eBay. Maybe. I don't even know. I mean, I paid under 10 for Cannonball Run 2. But they were not expensive on DVD, okay? 2 was not available on Blu-ray, just DVD. But they're not expensive. Speed Zone is $40 fucking bucks. It's $40 for what is arguably, undeniably, the worst movie in the franchise. So poorly, badly connected that only one person who was in the first 2 movies is actually in that movie. And it's a cameo appearance. And it was so fucking bad, they had to decide to not even call it Cannonball Run 3, but Speed Zone. That's how fucking bad the third movie is. So, for it to be $40 on DVD... It's like the crime of the century. It's ridiculously overpriced. I kind of get it in some respects. I'm sure Speed Zone was probably not a mass demand for Speed Zone to be put out on DVD. Thus, I'm sure whatever was put out on DVD was a very small quantity and sold to people, and it's probably hard to get a hold of because let's say they made a million copies of I don't know how many copies they make, obviously, but let's just say in terms of numbers they made a million copies of the first Cannonball run, and maybe in the second one they made like 500,000. I'm sure they probably only made like 100,000 for Speed Zone because it's not like there was a massive demand. People weren't breaking down the doors of the fucking production company saying, "Give us Speed Zone. We want Speed Zone on DVD and Blu-ray, or we'll fucking destroy. We'll boycott the studio. We'll destroy it with bulldozers." I'm sure that was not happening with Speed Zone in any way, shape, or form. So there was probably a token, bare bones DVD thrown out there, and it was probably a very minimum run. Like, I'm sure the guy who was in charge of putting it out on DVD probably was like, really going to the manufacturer going, "We really have to order 100,000? Can't we order 50? Well, can we get maybe 80? I'm sure he was fussing over it, trying to get us down as low as he could so he could get the production cost down to be as low as he could. But at any rate, I'm sure that's probably the reason why Speed Zone ends up being like $40 on DVD. Will I eventually get Speed Zone and review it? I gotta be honest with you. If I find it at a decent price, I will. I'm not sure I'm ready to dish out $40 for what could be one of the worst films I will ever review. But I might at some point. I might get a wild hair up my ass and say, you know what? I fucking gotta have Speed Zone now. Which is what happened with this. Is I had to have Cannonball Run 2 now because I got a wild hair up my ass and said had to get it. So Cannonball Run 2. Like I said, I'm not. It's one of those movies where it's worth pulling out like maybe every decade or so and watching it once just to remind yourself that it was as bad as it was. And occasionally you laugh at the jokes again because some of the jokes are new now. But you sit there cringing at the scenes that are so bad. So I don't regret getting it. I don't recommend a lot of people get it. I mean, if you're a fan of the first movie, just stick with the first movie, really. If you're not a fan of the first movie, you're definitely not going to like the second movie. But if you're like me and you're this guy who, has to see the next part of the story, even knowing how bad it is going to be, Cannonball Run 2 is not that expensive on DVD on eBay. So, yeah, it's kind of worth getting if you're that completist asshole who has to see it. But it's not a good movie in any fashion at all. But anyway, there you go. Cannonball Run 2 for the cheese remote.